So we have this first component of banking in the United States set up during the Civil War. So then you get into the Gilded Age. This is post-Civil War. Um, the South, anyway, is totally devastated. There's some people who want to industrialize the South. The North is way ahead in that respect, and this is when really industrialization takes off in the United States. You have a lot of foreign money coming in. You have the rise of the railroads. People are linking all of the country via railroads. Railroads really changed America. It's weird to get so excited about about trains. It's kind of like a pursuit for kind of guys in their basement with the little train sets, which is cool. But no, like the railroad itself was an incredible leap forward in America.
Oh, I mean, the railroad was so important. I mean, if you think of, not only did it connect one side of the country to the other side of the country, which didn't happen until 1869, but it also was really the birth of these massive industrial concerns, right?
Right.
And that is where you had, and that's why banks were so important during this period to fund those.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing about this period, right, is that we only have the office of the comptroller of the currency. So that means that there's still no central regulator for banks. And so you're having these really frequent panics and financial crises, on average every 6 years, I think.
Yeah, you had a banking panic or crisis on average once every 6 years during the Gilded Age.
Yeah, and you ended up having two like fairly big depressions, not as big as the Great Depression, obviously, but in the 1870s and 1890s, these were financially devastating events.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, we like to think about, oh, when you look at the United States history, that really the bottom point was the Great Depression of the 1930s, and to a certain extent, that's true. But at that point, I mean, that is very unusual to think about today, because even though we went through the financial crisis, it certainly didn't turn into a Great Depression. But at the time, depressions were actually a pretty common occurrences. And the reason, kind of to allude to what Gabby's getting at, is that because we only had the OCC, we didn't have the Federal Reserve, we didn't have the FDIC, banks would fail all the time, and that would take all these people's savings, and then they would have no money.
Absolutely. So, sorry, I just have to laugh because my mother pointed out to me the other day that I say absolutely all the time on the show, and I don't say it in real life. But you are correct, John Maxfield. One of the things that that was really interesting about this to me, this whole history of the banking crisis, is that a lot of times people portray bankers as these fat cats, kind of like you talked about at the beginning of the show. Especially guys like JP Morgan. Like you hear JP Morgan, you think of this giant investment international bank, right? But the original JP Morgan was actually, I mean, in his own way, kind of a good guy, because during these financial crises, the little panics that they had, him and a few other bankers would get together and kind of act a little bit like a central bank to help these other banks out to keep them from failing.
Yeah, and really, if you think about JP Morgan, I mean, he is maybe the greatest banker in American history. And one of the reasons is because, during the Gilded Age, we had just this explosion of industrialization, right? That's really when the United States turned into the economic powerhouse that we are today, is during the Gilded Age. And how did that happen? Where did the financing for that come from? Well, that came from, in large part, Europe. And JP Morgan, what they did is, and this is the reason they became so successful, is they were the primary bank that brought money from Europe and England in particular over to the United States to invest in railroads, to invest in steel companies and all
Yeah.
these different things.